Alright, I welcome you to my YouTube channel. So basically continue where we left in a previous video where we looked at the branching of the aorta, of which we said that in our next video we'll discuss the circle of Willis. So the circle of Willis, we'll discuss it in this video. So basically this is the circle of Willis. So in this video just discuss how this circle of Willis is formed. So one can ask to say, what's the circle of Willis? The circle of Willis is actually a joining together of arteries on the bottom of the brain, that supply blood to the various parts of the brain. That's basically a simple definition. So just a brief recap, because this video depends on a previous video that we had. So in a previous video we talked about the branching of the aorta. I'll basically just single out one important artery that we discussed, of which is the internal common carotid artery, which branches from the left common carotid artery, of which the left common carotid artery branches from the anchor of the thoracic aorta. So basically that's like a brief introduction. For you to understand, you can go back to the previous video, go through, then you'll be able to understand this one, the circle of Willis. So basically the circle of Willis is actually formed by four major arteries. It has two internal carotid artery, which is this one, the internal carotid artery, and the vertebral artery, of which the vertebral artery branches from the subclavian artery. You can just check in a previous video, that's why it branches from. So it has two cerebral arteries, which is this one and this one. Then also have two internal carotid arteries. So for us to basically understand how the circle of Willis is formed, we divide the circle of Willis into two. So we'll divide it like this. So we have the anterior part and the posterior, just like that. So the anterior and the posterior part. So let's first discuss the anterior part. So basically the anterior part has the internal carotid artery, which is this one. So please follow me properly for you to understand. So the internal carotid artery branches into two. It will branch into the anterior cerebral artery, into two anterior cerebral arteries, So we have this one and the other one. So basically these are the two. So we can say there's the left and the right anterior cerebral arteries, which branch from the internal carotid artery. So these two anterior cerebral arteries will be joined together by what we call the communicating, or what we're going to say the anterior communicating artery, the one on top here, which is here. It joins the two. So that's that. So this is basically the anterior part. Now we come to the posterior part, because it's a circle. So now how does the posterior part contribute, or how does the posterior part join to the anterior part? So now the posterior part has two cerebral arteries, of which they branch from the subclavian artery. You can check that in the previous video. So these two cerebral arteries, the left and the right, will join together and form the basilar artery. So the basilar artery, which is here, the basilar artery, of which the basilar artery will also further divide into two. It will divide into the left and right posterior cerebral artery, which is here. So of this one, the right and the left posterior cerebral artery. So now the two posterior and the two left and right posterior cerebral arteries will be joined to their corresponding arterial cerebral arteries by an artery called the posterior communicating artery, which is this one. So we have two posterior communicating arteries, so which is here, this one here, one, and the other one. So basically this joins the two posterior cerebral arteries to the two arterial cerebral arteries, hence forming a what? A circle. So basically that's the circle of Willis. So I'll just give a brief function of these arteries. So the posterior aspect will actually just supply blood to the posterior, to the arterial. The arterial arteries will just supply blood to the arterial part of the brain, and then the posterior part will also just supply blood to the posterior part of the brain, which is the posterior cerebral artery. The two posterior cerebral arteries will supply the posterior part of the brain. Then on the basilar artery, we also have some arteries that branch here. These will just basically supply blood to the stem of the brain. Then also have the medial cerebral artery will supply blood to the sides of the brain. So basically this is the circle of Willis. Don't forget to subscribe and share, and join me in our next video as we are going to discuss venous return the venous return of the brain, how is blood draining away from the brain. So God bless you. Join me in our next video.